William Chick, who was fired from the Wounded Warrior Project in 2012 after a dispute with his supervisor. He said the charity swiftly fired anyone that leaders considered a bad cultural fit. Tamir Khalifa for the New York Times, Jacksonville, Florida. In 2014, after 10 years of rapid growth, the Wounded Warrior Project flew its roughly 500 employees to Colorado Springs for an all-hands meeting at the five-star Broadmoor Hotel. They were celebrating their biggest year yet, $225 million raised in a workforce that had nearly doubled. On the opening night, before 3 days of strategy sessions and team-building field trips, the staff gathered in the hotel courtyard. Suddenly, a spotlight focused on a 10-story bell tower where the chief executive, Stephen Nardizzi, stepped off the edge and repelled toward the cheering crowd. That evening is emblematic of the polished and well-financed image cultivated by the Wounded Warrior Project, the country's largest and fastest-growing veterans charity. Since its inception in 2003 as a basement operation handing out backpacks to wounded veterans, the charity has evolved into a fundraising giant, taking in more than $372 million in 2015, largely through small donations from people over 65. Today, the charity has 22 locations offering programs to help veterans readjust to society, attend school, find work and participate in athletics. It contributes millions to smaller veterans groups. And it has become a brand name, its logo emblazoned on sneakers, paper towel packs and television commercials that run dozens of times. But in its swift rise, it has also embraced aggressive styles of fundraising, marketing and personnel management that have many current and former employees questioning whether it has drifted from its mission. It has spent millions a year on travel, dinners, hotels and conferences that often seemed more lavish than appropriate, more than 4 dozen current and former employees said in interviews. Former workers recounted buying business-class seats and regularly jetting around the country for minor meetings, or staying in $500 per night hotel rooms. The organization has also spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in recent years on public relations and lobbying campaigns to deflect criticism of its spending and to fight legislative efforts to restrict how much nonprofits spend on overhead. About 40% of the organization's donations in 2014 were spent on its overhead, or about $124 million, according to the charity rating group Charity Navigator. While that percentage, which includes administrative expenses and marketing costs, is not as much as for some groups, it is far more than for many veterans charities, including the Semper Fi Fund, a wounded veterans group that spent about 8% of donations on overhead. As a result, some philanthropic watchdog groups have criticized the Wounded Warrior Project for spending too heavily on itself. Some of its own employees have criticized it too. William Chick, a former supervisor, spent 5 years with the Wounded Warrior Project. It slowly had less focus on veterans and more on raising money and protecting the organization, he said. Veterans participate in a soldier ride on Jan. 8 in Marathon, Florida. The Wounded Warrior Project program provides adapted equipment for injured veterans to cycle together. Andy Newman, Florida Keys News Bureau, via Associated Press. Mr. Chick, who was fired in 2012 after a dispute with his supervisor, said he saw the Wounded Warrior Project help hundreds of veterans. But like other former employees, he said the group swiftly fired anyone leaders considered a bad cultural fit. 18 former employees, many of them wounded veterans themselves, said they had been fired for seemingly minor missteps or perceived insubordination. At least half a dozen former employees said they were let go after raising questions about ineffective programs or spending. A spokeswoman for the charity said it fired those people because of poor performance or ethical breaches, and that each of them was given the opportunity to address their work problems. The spokeswoman, Ayla Tezel, said that more than a third of the charity's employees are veterans, and that the organization is rated one of the top nonprofits to work for by the Nonprofit Times. Sometimes employees make poor choices that can't be overlooked, Ms. And sometimes those employees are veterans. A for-profit model veterans organizations in the United States often reflect the era in which they were created. After World War I, they resembled fraternal orders. After Vietnam, many focused on advocacy in Washington. The Wounded Warrior Project cuts a different profile. Under Mr. Nardizzi's direction, it has modeled itself on for-profit corporations, with a focus on data, scalable products, quarterly numbers, and branding. In an interview with the organization's 4-story headquarters in a palm-lined office park in Jacksonville, Florida, Mr. Nardizzi, 45, said spending on fundraising and other expenses not directly related to veterans programs has enabled the Wounded Warrior Project to grow faster and serve more people. It estimates that 80,000 veterans have used its services. I look at companies like Starbucks, that's the model. Mr. Nardizzi said. You're looking at companies that are getting it right, treating their employees right, delivering great services and great products, then are growing the brand to support all of that. The charity recently pledged to raise $500 million for a trust to fund lifetime supplemental health care for severely wounded veterans. And on Tuesday, it started a program to provide care for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries, two of the most common injuries for veterans of recent wars. Steve Nardizzi,